You can't do it all. Okay, now that I have your attention, let me explain. Like you, I have been sold the same lie for years that I can do anything I want. And I'm not here to argue the point of whether or not there are certain goals that you can or cannot achieve. What I want to talk about is the thing that I don't hear talked about often enough. And that is the reality that while you can do anything, you can't do everything. And it's better when you don't try to. But before we dive into this, make sure you like this video, subscribe to the channel if you haven't already, and ring that little notification bell so that you never miss a tutorial or upload. So maybe you never bought into this lie like I did, or maybe you did, but you already figured out a long time ago that it wasn't true. Or maybe right now you are drowning in overwhelm trying to do literally everything. Now, this lie is definitely not just about business owners, but that's who I'm talking to specifically here. I know I'm not the first person to talk about this. David Allen says the exact same thing in his book, Getting Things Done, but I just don't see enough of it in my feed. So I wanted to touch on a few points here, give you some food for thought, and then hopefully hear what you have to say as well. So the first point I want to touch on is this: more doesn't mean better. Now, what do I mean by that? So I was under the assumption for a very long time, and maybe you are too, that if I just posted more often on social media or I posted on more of the platforms, that suddenly my business would blow up. But that's not a recipe for success. That is a recipe for burnout. And the reality is that while your audience may be on all of the platforms like you are, they absolutely focus on one or maybe two as far as where they consume content and where they actually look to purchase from someone. So, why would you waste time being on all the platforms if they're not? Figure out which one or maybe two platforms are where your audience is focusing and the best place for you to be, and then ignore or automate the rest. Now, I do want to address one quick thing though, because I did see a video that Pat Flynn posted the other day where he was talking about the irony of automating social media. And I don't disagree with him at all. And I am not saying that you should automate to every single platform just to have a presence there. I'm simply saying that if there's like one or two extra platforms that you feel like are still important to have a presence on in your business, like for me, that Instagram comes to mind, then I don't see the harm if you're automating and not giving it too much of your time and energy. But Pat was referring specifically to automated comments and replies and like basically artificial connection. That is completely different. I absolutely wouldn't do that because what is the point? Right? I will maybe post just to have a presence and all of that. But if a genuine conversation started up on an Instagram post, I would absolutely go there and engage personally with that conversation. But when it comes to, really being a part of and aware of the conversation and the connection, one platform should be your primary and maybe a secondary one. And it's not just about what kind of content you like creating, it also needs to be about the kind of content that your ideal client likes consuming. So if you don't know what platform your ideal client is going to first or maybe second, then there's some opportunity for market research there. And Pat has a lot of great tools for that. Actually, his book, Will It Fly, which I think I've already mentioned, I've been listening to, really goes in depth into figuring that kind of stuff out and doing that market research. So I highly recommend it. Second point I want to make is something that I've talked about before. In fact, the very first, well, second technically, episode of the TSA Weekly podcast, we focused on a quote from John D. Rockefeller saying that you should not be afraid to let go of the good to go for the great. And this so applies again here. Every opportunity, everything that you say yes to is taking your energy and your focus and your time away from something else. So whether that something else is something in your personal life, your family, your spouse, whatever that might be, or even just your own self-care, that is taking energy away from that. Or maybe it's just taking your energy away from being able to have the time to build those genuine connections, which I think we're all starting to realize is where those conversions happen, where we start to actually engage with our future customers. If you're saying yes to like too many platforms or posting too often, then you're kind of saying no to creating genuine connection and conversations with people because you won't have the time or energy left over to do it. You're also saying no to an extent to being able to create and post high quality, high value content, which, let's be honest, there's kind of a lack of in this content heavy world these days. There's so much content out there, but how much of it is actually high quality and high value? When we're too busy trying to be in all of the places, then, it's that quality over quantity kind of thing, right? Our content, it suffers. And what that also means, especially if you're like me and you're doing tutorials or kind of giving a window into your mentorship or how you coach in the content that you create, well, you're not giving a great representation to potential clients as to what you have to offer. You're too busy just trying to pump out the content that they're not seeing what they would get from working with you. So you're doing yourself a disservice in that regard as well. When you're looking at an opportunity, whether it's posting to a certain platform, saying yes to an opportunity to network somewhere, or even taking on a particular client that may not be your ideal client, the question that you ask yourself needs to be rephrased from can I do this to should I do this? And yes, I just used the S word, which I don't normally like. But again, this is a should coming from you. This is an internal should. So this one I'm okay with. It's when other people impose their shoulds on us that I don't like. Okay, the next point I want to touch on is to focus on your greatest opportunity for ROI, return on investment. So we've touched on the 80-20 rule before, the Pareto rule, and this is where we're talking about that 20% of your effort leads to 80% of your results. So where are you getting your greatest ROI? Do you actually know what's working in your business? If the answer is no, then this is the most important thing that you are hearing from me in this episode. You need to know what works for you. Where are your greatest leads coming from? If you're not tracking your KPIs and you're not paying attention to your analytics, then you don't know the answer to this question, which means that you have no choice but to spread your net wide and post everywhere and just, it's kind of like throwing spaghetti at the wall, seeing what sticks. But that's exactly why you're feeling drained right now, because you don't know what's working. And so you can't double down on it or even triple down on it. Half of this is understanding where your greatest leads are coming from. And the other half of this is understanding where most of your time is going. And this is something I've kind of been thinking about for myself recently, because somebody asked me about time tracking tools, specifically in Trello, because as you all know, that is my favorite productivity tool of choice. But they were asking me about time tracking tools in that. And it started me thinking, like, as a solopreneur, it never dawned on me to track my time. That's not the kind of relationship I have with my clients. And so, billable hours, that concept isn't really something I need to worry about. But I started to think about it and I thought, if I use a time tracking tool like that, it would help me better understand the 20% of the 20-80 rule, right? Where is my time going? Where is all of that effort going? And am I getting the 80% results out of that effort? So I'm doing a little experiment. I'm kind of in the middle of doing it right now. There will be a future video where I show you kind of the results of some time tracking that I've been doing lately. So keep an eye out for that. I'm not entirely sure when I'm going to post it. So if you haven't subscribed and rung that notification bell, do it now if you're interested in that video so that you don't miss it when I release it. But the point here is that once you do know what's working, you can really multiply your efforts and then ultimately your results there and free up time for your life. And then the last point that I want to touch on here is that please don't forget that automation is always an option. And I'm not talking about automating the relationship building like I already said. Automate the repetition, the mundane. That's what frees you up to actually have time for that genuine relationship building. And kind of a good rule of thumb here is if you can't automate it and it isn't based on creation like courses or tutorials, content, or products or whatever, and it's not based on connection, then that's the stuff that you should be looking at to see if maybe it's just got to go. I'm not saying that running a business isn't going to take time and effort. What I am saying is that there's a better than good chance that it doesn't require as much time and effort as it's currently demanding. So the question I have for you this week is this: do you know what's working? What is your number one source for new leads? Let me know in the comments. I hope you liked that video and more importantly, that you found it helpful. If you did, please consider subscribing to the channel and sharing it with a fellow solopreneur. And make sure you check out the description for links to how we can connect and maybe even work together.